Welcome everyone. I'm Cristina Peñasco, a member of Cambridge Zero and a lecturer in public policy at the Department of Politics and International Studies. And I will be chairing this closing panel of the Cambridge Zero Festival 2021 on sharing local solutions and inspiring global action in the year of COP26. I'm very thrilled to be here tonight and share the floor with our fantastic panelists that will be sharing with us their own experiences of local solutions from a diverse set of angles to inspire action and to provide their visions on the road to COP26 that will take place, as you know, in a couple of weeks in Glasgow. We have enjoyed a festival from the last few days in which we have listened and learned a lot about the role of women in climate change, about climate justice, the energy transformation, the role of the food sector in sustainability, and many other essential topics for boosting the change that we need. And tonight, we have an inspiring panel that will go deeper into the opportunities brought by local solutions to climate change. Before I introduce our panelists, just a couple of housekeeping guidelines. So you can ask questions during the interventions of our speakers. We will have a first round of introductory remarks by our speakers, then a short discussion among them, and Q&A will follow. By the end of the event, we are lucky to have Emily Shockbrook, our director in Cambridge Zero, that will join as well for a final remarks in this climate festival. So feel free to type your questions and I will post this to our speakers. If you want to address your question to one of our speakers specifically, please do it as well, and I will address this directly to them. That said, I want to steal more time from this fantastic night. And let me introduce first and welcome our first panelist, Dr. Nicole Redburst. She is a member of the Ninu First Nation and has worked with various Indigenous patients and communities around the globe, helping to bridge the gap between Indigenous traditional and modern medical systems. She is co-founder and chair of the Arctic Indigenous Wellness Foundation based in the Canadian North, with her foundation awarded the $1 million 2017 Arctic Inspiration Prize for their work with vulnerable population within land-based healing settings in the Northwest Territories. Dr. Redburst is currently an assistant professor in the Department of Family and Community Medicine, Indians into Medicine program at the University of North Dakota, where she has helped co-develop the first Indigenous Health PhD degree program in North America. Thanks, Nicole, for joining us tonight. We have also Harry Simuntala. He's a Zambian youth, a passionate rural African youth leader, youth and governance activist. He has over 5 years experience in civil society. Currently, he's working with a youth-led organization that has a bias in governance, environment, and healthcare promotion. As a program director, he is also a graduate in civic leadership under Young African Leadership Initiative at the University of South Africa, UNISA, and he's currently pursuing an LMB with the Zambian Open University. Thank you, Harry, very much. Looking forward to your intervention. And then we have, last but not least, Rhiannon Osborne, who is a climate change commissioner for the Cambridge and Peterborough Combined Authority, working as an independent advisor to the local government on how to achieve climate stability through mitigation and adaptation, while also maximizing the opportunities and co-benefits of climate action to achieve healthier and more inclusive communities. Her work focuses on local climate justice and participatory democracy, and she's also a fifth-year medical student at the University of Cambridge. Thank you, Rhiannon, for being here. The order will be Rhiannon first, then Harry, then Nicole, in inverse order as I introduce them. Each of them will have between 7-8 minutes for introductory remarks, and we will have Q&A, discussion, and conversation about the very exciting topics they will talk about tonight. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining, and Rhiannon, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and yeah, so great to be here with such a wonderful panel as well. So I'm going to talk about the work I've been doing with the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Commission on Climate for the last 18 months on what we can do locally to respond to and adapt to the climate crisis. So as a young climate activist, it was quite a change for me to go from protesting on the streets most of the time to being asked to help make recommendations to policymakers. But I think when we think about COP26 and climate change, it's absolutely essential that we take a holistic and justice-focused lens. So this works at the global level when we think about the debt that richer countries owe to poorer countries, the land we owe back to Indigenous people, and the need for a global Green New Deal to transition to a regenerative, sustainable, and just global economy. But this lens of people-centered justice also applies at the local level. And when we talk about climate change, too often we talk about doing things for the planet and for the environment as if it was a kind of sacrifice that is going to take away from the enjoyment of our everyday lives. But actually, what is bad for the environment and the planet is almost always bad for people as well. And climate action is not just about statistics and emissions, but it's about communities, people, families, the nature around us, and the stories that we tell every day. So for my opening remarks, I'm going to talk a bit about how I have seen this play out locally as we wrote the most recent report for the Mayor and the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority. So this report and my work especially in it focused on the topic of a just transition. So what fairness means to local people, how we can spread the benefits of climate action, and how we can meaningfully involve communities in the transition. So if you think about the need for local climate justice, there is significant inequality across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and significant differences in how people are able to act on climate. Lots of communities in the region have been left behind by policymaking in the past, and we have to make sure that climate action doesn't replicate these inequalities or make it worse. Not only this, but high income households and also companies are far more responsible for emissions than poorer communities at the global level, but also at the local. And we know from lots of research done that when it comes to the impacts of climate change, the worst impacts are going to hit the already marginalized and vulnerable communities. And so in our region, what this looks like is flooding and the ability to afford home insurance, or vulnerability to food poverty and overheating. And so while everyone has a role to play, we have to consider the different roles and capacities that different people and organizations have. And this means not burdening low-income communities, but it also means holding to account organizations who can and should change their practices. So talking about kind of community involvement in this change, I think it's really important to think about how when we center climate action around people and around local communities and around fairness, who is the expert in the conversation suddenly changes. And I've been very much trying to embody the truth that is that people are experts in their own lives and communities. And I certainly don't feel like an expert to tell them how climate action should work in their local area. Because people want to see climate action, but they also want to see us tackle the challenges that they face in their community. And they also want to be involved in shaping and designing that future, not as passive recipients of some predetermined future. And yeah, so as I said, we really tried to embody this belief in how we came up with the recommendations for our report. So we ran a citizens panel in the Fens, which faces kind of particular unique challenges locally. There's a really cherished landscape and heritage, which is intimately connected to agriculture. But local greenhouse gas emissions are really high, whilst at the same time, there's lots of issues related to deprivation in the area. So local engagement on climate action is absolutely essential, whilst also protecting way of life and helping to tackle local concerns. And what came out of this panel and other consultations that we ran in preparation for this report was that the connection of people to the local land and the rural nature of the region came through really strongly, as did their desire to see a fairer, healthier, more connected and more resilient region. People have dreams and ideas that they want to be able to implement, and having people on board with change is absolutely key to making it a success and enabling them to do that. So in terms of what these local solutions to global problems look like, in our work in particular, we Together, these residents designed principles for a just transition locally, which we have then put into our recommendations in the report that we released on Monday. So this includes policies centered around doing no harm, ensuring that polluters pay for damage, protecting people on low incomes, involving communities in decision-making, running meaningful communication, and valuing the natural environment as it should be. And in terms of how this might change people's everyday lives, we have a really high number of people in the region who live in fuel poverty. So proper retrofitting programs, community heating schemes can help tackle this by improving the efficiency of housing stock and facilitating access to affordable renewable energy, as well as providing skilled green jobs for many workers locally. We're also looking at kind of access to high quality public and active transport, which is really deeply unequal across the region. And we now have an opportunity to invest in a transport system that works for all communities, that's affordable, and that connects different areas of where we live. And as well as this, we have a lot of people locally living in food poverty. So it's a challenge for many residents across the region, alongside general lack of access to affordable, local and sustainable food. So what we hope to do with a local just transition is invest in improving food distribution networks, supporting community farming, and connecting people to local farmers, which of course can really bring significant health benefits to these families as well. So I think in summary, what we found, and I guess it's not as surprising, is that local solutions have to be grounded in the realities of local people, in fairness, and in making sure that climate action is an opportunity to prioritize people equitably, as well as to prioritize the planet. So yeah, I think that's it from me.
Thank you very much, Rhiannon, for this view of what is happening in our surroundings, in the closest environment that we have here in Cambridge. A lot of activity I see you are doing, and I hope we can discuss more and learn more in the Q&A after that. Thank you, Harry. Your turn.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Good to be here. That was good, Rhiannon. I think you have shared quite substantive information. Okay, so talking about local solutions, I think I will begin shortly look at what are some of the challenges that exist in our communities. I think one of the things that I should highlight is the issues of community awareness of the climate injustices that exist both from the government ends as well as from the cooperatives end. And then also other things that includes a participation. There's quite a lesser participation of communities in this struggle for a better climate conditions. So, and we also have issues to do with people have been left out in issues to do with key decision making processes. So in terms of ensuring that there are local solutions have been adopted or perhaps have been implemented, because the challenge has been that if you provide a solution to the community that is not well contextualized, people do not really accept or perhaps adapt to that particular solution that has been provided. So as a young person who is an activist and working with a youth-led organization with a bias for the environment, particularly looking at how do we contribute to climate justice, we have begun doing awareness programs, doing quite a number of activities that increase our awareness around climate justice. And also maybe I think, given the fact that we are sharing about local solutions, the organization which I'm working for, which is called Muchinga Corridors Zambia, it's one of the organizations in a local area where we started from. It was the only organization that pushed for the commemoration or the celebration of World Environmental Day. It hasn't been commemorated or recognized in these particular spaces. So you can see that there's quite a divide and a gap when it comes to access to information, and why is it important for people to be participating in a climate justice issues. So in terms of improving the solutions, we need more advocacy, and that's where we have been working on to increase community-led advocacy on some of the prevailing challenges that are there. Because climate change, I think it is told in different narratives. the way I'm going to talk about climate issues and climate injustice from my own setup and the other setup, even from our own country, it is taught in different parts. So what's important is for people to understand what are some of the prevailing climate injustices that are there for them to have the community-led advocacy. So in doing so, what we have begun doing as an organization and as activists is to encourage people, to train people now to carry out advocacy issues, to encourage them to get closer to the government policies that have been implemented, and also to encourage them to understand some of the things that are under threat due to government policies or government works, which might be developmental in a way, but of course they might be creating an environmental problem or a climate problem. Then also, as we believe in partnering with different institutions and organizations, like-minded people bringing solution, because one of the other challenges that has been noted is issues to do with energy. So energy is one of the most prevalent problem with us here, given the fact that people's reliance on energy is through using of charcoal, which is the cutting down of trees and all that. So how do you now advocate for better and clean energy that is not going to contribute to the carbon emissions, given the fact that those are some of the key areas that the COP26 is looking at? So we have been encouraging partnering with different stakeholders to be providing clean energy stoves in local communities where the burning is actually very high, so that we can reduce on the cutting down of trees. And also what is important is that we're looking at the 4 areas that we are looking at with the COP26. So using the local solution, one which is more adaptable and one which communities can apply, the idea of planting trees. So we are taking this initiative in schools, local schools, where they would appreciate the importance of doing that. And also given the fact that poverty also plays a very critical aspect when it comes to climate injustice. So what we are looking at is how do we now make an environment really attractive and for people to participate in fighting climate issues. So we have also started encouraging communities to be planting citric trees, at least where they'll benefit a livelihood, and at the same time they are creating a fair environment for everyone, so that we do not face the challenges that might come as a result of practicing bad practices that are bringing about climate issues. So I think from my summary, those are some of the issues, but also maybe before I go, this brings quite an important opportunity for us, especially in Zambia, given the fact that we had a new government. There were quite some of the issues that we were having previously with regards to the environment, the invasion of certain protected areas. But of course, we are hoping that this new government will follow them with regards to the policies that are going to bring forth, and also the commitment that are going to give at the forthcoming COP26, where leaders are going to meet. So it will really present a very wonderful opportunity for advocacy, increasing community participation, and also learning from the community. What are some of the solutions that they are going to create, given the fact that they are now become aware of the challenges that they are facing? Thank you so much for now.
Thank you very much, Harry, for this vision more in the African countries, particularly in Zambia. I think there are a lot of overlaps in the sense of both Rhiannon and you have talked about how to communicate, how to engage with people in different contexts. So maybe that's a point of agreement that we should all explore, no matter in which context we live. Before I give the floor to Nicole, please let me tell you again that you can use the chat and the Q&A function to ask your questions to our panelists. And next, Nicole, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Masicho. And I'm going to share my screen because I want to show some pictures as I talk through a narrative. So bear with me for 2 seconds. And I always like to root the discussion in why we're here in this moment as a human species. And clearly the world has changed. And from my Indigenous perspective in subarctic Canada, from my community, from my elders, we have gone from a circular and natural worldview to a square synthetic worldview. And this has significantly limited our understanding and appreciation for complexity and the systems relationships that are a part of all of our realities. But most importantly, we have been pushed further and further away from the most fundamental of our relationships, which is that of our Mother Earth. And the work of our organization in Northern Canada, the Arctic Indigenous Wellness Foundation, seeks to reconnect this relationship. And I share here some of the teachings that come from our work running an urban land-based healing camp, where we help to re-engage community members in relationship to the land as a fundamental component of not only land healing, but also discussions around climate that we hope to see elevated around the COP discussions, as we thankfully see more appreciation for traditional ecological knowledge around the globe. Now, from our Indigenous perspective, there is no separation, absolutely, between ourselves and that of the earth, with complete interconnections existing that precludes any type of isolated definition. And I like to give this quote by Paula Gunn Allen, who's a Pueblo woman from the southern part of the United States. And she so aptly stated that we are the land. The earth is the mind of the people, as we are the mind of the earth. The land is not really the place separate from ourselves, where we act out the drama of our isolate destinies. It is not a means of survival, a setting of our affairs. It is rather a part of our being, dynamic, significant, real. It is our self. And we as women are water carriers. We're taught to be water carriers in our community. And this is both for the protection of the earth, but also the protection of the water. We carry within the amniotic fluid, nourishing our babies as they grow within inside of us. But water protector is also a concurrent responsibility as women or other feminine identifying genders, because both water bodies need to be healthy in our home for wellness in the communities to be possible. The blood that flows through our veins is like the water that flows through Mother Earth. We're in a constant state of relationship that is key to achieving what we call a good life. And when our babies pass from within our wombs to the outside world, the responsibility for life transfers from us as mothers to Mother Earth as a provider and a giver. And we then become part of a deep relationship that is premised on what we call natural law, which values honesty, empathy, love, and justice to promote a cooperative spirit, interdependence, and coexistence as a planetary relative. So why is this important for me to state here? And I often think of the words of Chief Dan George, who was a chief of the Sitsalewe-2 First Nation in the western part of Canada. And he said, "Allow me to learn the ways of your book knowledge so that I may combine it with my natural knowledge and lead the way." We as Indigenous peoples understand that a blend of traditional knowledge with modern knowledge is the only way forward sustainably for the planet. Yet in the spirit of scientific hegemony that has pervaded most branches of Western research, governance, policy, and inquiry, including the COP26 processes, knowledge democracy has not prevailed. And I like to give this term, even though it's a big term, it's called epistemological pluralism. But it's a term that recognizes that in any given practice context, there may be several valuable ways of knowing, and that accommodating this plurality can lead to more successful integrative study, solutions, and practice. Yet we really have not seen this being prioritized. We are slowly seeing, however, change happening, and I believe it is because of a deep reflection of the values, vision, and purpose of what we're trying to do here as a collective community. But I also believe it was due to diverse voices standing up for their rights and showcasing the strengths they offer to the global community in the time of great crisis and need. And this occurred also by allies standing up and also stepping back to allow voices to be heard. There are nested but interconnected levels of knowledges and applications surrounding healthy communities and our ecosystems. And the more we can continue to step back and uplift diverse voices, the more hope we have of getting through this intersecting crisis. So although Mother Earth is a living system that can transform and heal herself, I think of the words of my sister Anne Paulina. She's the Nicaraguan traditional custodian from the Madarara Lower Fitzroy River in Western Australia, who states she will be lonely without the vibrations of her human family. So the planetary health movement is thankfully gaining significant traction in and around both universities and organizations in North America, Europe, and abroad, which is very positive. We're seeing increasing discussions at COP26 around this. However, we need to remember that planetary health is by no means a new innovative discipline, as is often suggested in many academic circles, but a deeply rooted connection that all of our ancestors, Indigenous sisters and brothers, had to the land as a medicine place for thousands of years. So to understand the planet and its functions is to understand oneself in the Indigenous worldview. So if the climate change movement broadly is to be successful, it will need to platform itself as more culturally safe, critically conscious, and have a greater appreciation for marginalized voices that have not made it to spaces such as COP26 to date. So I just want to say masicho, thank you for the organizers and moderators for opening space for this discussion, and I look forward to hearing from the other speakers today.
Thank you very much, Nicole, for such a thoughtful view of the indigenous communities. So important these days as well. Sometimes we forget the part that they play, and also the role of the land, not only the climate itself on all this. So thank you very much. We have, which I really like, to be honest, around half an hour, 25 minutes for open discussion between us and for Q&A. And I guess, I mean, there has been this point, I think, of common common place and agreement about, as I mentioned before, communication, advocacy, and how to do this. And in view of, or in the road to COP26, I guess my main question for the three of you is, what would you like to see during COP26, and how we can reconcile the idea of local solutions within a framework in which is what is discussed is at the international level in the negotiations? How can we make these negotiators include and introduce these views and effects of local communities in the COP26?
Nicole, do you want to
go ahead? Go ahead. I can go.
Yeah, I think in terms of how COP26 can support these local solutions, I think there are some large elephants in the room that kind of need to be addressed at the global level. And I think one of those is climate finance and loss and damages, and how, you know, it's pretty hard to be asking communities who are facing floods and droughts today to say, oh, like, why don't you design your solutions to the climate crisis and forget about all the money we've taken from you and all the emissions that we have emitted and that you have not. So I think the rules of the global economy and how much they massively favor corporations and rich countries are very much tied to local solutions, right? Because like, if there's no finance and if we don't meet 1.5 degrees, then, you know, it's very hard to be asking local people to come up with solutions and to be able to implement those solutions when there's still these hugely oppressive factors that are stopping much of the global majority from taking the action that they would like. So I think that's a big one. And then I think in more kind of UK specific, I think it would be, and I guess this applies to potentially quite a lot of OECD countries, is more devolution and more power given to local authorities to implement climate action. So less top-down Westminster-led climate action, but more funding given to local authorities to design the right programs for them. And that means, right, a huge government package of retrofit funding, which I think we haven't really seen in the reports that were released on Monday or Tuesday. But for those packages to be led, delivered, and for the decision making to be at the local level. So I think there really needs to be a rebalance of national government to local government power within the context of transfer of finances and payment of debt from high emitting countries like the UK.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Nicole, Harry, something you want to add on this?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I'll note, and it's been a contention, at least from Indigenous communities, is even being able to participate equitably at COP. There's been huge inequities in vaccine access around the globe, which has included many of our marginalized populations and Indigenous people. And the travel requirements for getting to COP in the first place are very restricted in that manner. So there's many Indigenous communities who have been excluded just based on those restrictions and inequitable access to being able to get vaccinations. The second piece is that Indigenous groups are not sovereign parties in COP discussions. They are not considered state actors, even though they are sovereign nations within countries, including in places like Canada, the United States, and New Zealand, where treaties exist as sovereign nations. So one of the things that Indigenous groups have been pushing for is for voice and participation within that, given the IPCC report and many of the other reports citing the importance of traditional knowledge, but yet not really including those voices as part of that discussion piece. So we would like to see more support for Indigenous participation, not only to be able to get in the doors of the meeting through some of the vaccine inequity issues that continue to pervade the global space, but also ensuring state recognition for sovereign nations at the COP discussions, not only now, but going forward into the future.
Thanks, Nicole. Harry?
Okay, thank you so much. I think for me, what's important is, as the saying goes, let's put the money where the mouth is when it comes to climate justice. I think Nicole did raise some important serious issues around the Indigenous people and all that. So for me, we need to be taxing people. They should really talk more around issues of taxing those who are polluting the environment, because the people are facing the damage are actually those ones who are not even participating in these climate injustices. So there's need to really see to it that the polluters really pay for it. And we shouldn't really, they should not be soft on such issues, because it's the people that we are worried about, the people who are going to face the impact of these climate issues are not even there in the first place. And they are not even considered when coming up with those huge plans. Given an example of my country, you have these mining areas that are making a lot of huge resources, making a lot of money outside the country. And then you have people who are suffering from different issues that are caused by the degradation that has been done to the environment, and also the carbon emission that comes from these mining activities. So it's very important that we begin taxing the polluters, and governments should consider, the different governments at this stage, they should consider how they can strengthen taxing policies towards climate justice.
Thank you, Harry. The speakers, I mean, feel free to jump into each other conversation as well if you feel you want to contribute. I have a question here, and I think it's related to giving voice to people. So I guess for the three of you, but maybe Nicole has touched a little bit more on that. What do you think is the biggest hurdle among your communities in the three cases to ensure climate has a voice and is not just seen as government rhetoric?
It's such a complex issue, and one of the things that we've seen in my home region is we've already passed the Paris Climate Agreement of 1.5 degrees. We're at 2.4 degrees above the Paris Climate Agreement targets because of the Arctic regions heating at a much faster rate comparatively to the rest of the planet. So we are the red flag, the warning system for the rest of the globe, because we're seeing the effects very clearly. As a part of that, our Inuit brothers and sisters, even further in the Arctic areas, have been crying the voices for decades on this issue without many people listening. However, unfortunately, it's taken much mass events with the forest fires of this past season and the previous seasons, as well as the substantial flooding that everybody's been very much aware of, to start to get that conversation happening in greater focus and needs. But there's a lot of frustration, I think, from many Indigenous communities, where now we're finally, seeing some level of action despite decades of trying to make governments aware of these processes happening. So it's a delicate balance. And I think the most important piece when it comes to marginalized communities is having allies who are willing to also stand up and stand back and allow those voices to be heard, allowing platforms to be played so we can hear the stories and the narratives that are coming out, because most often many of these communities don't have the platform to be able to get their voices out there. And to date, although it's improving, we've now seen more and more platforms like this to be able to allow these discussions to occur and ensure we have representation from various communities at the table speaking.
Thank you, Nicole. You want to add something, Rhiannon, Harry?
Harry, you go ahead.
Adding on to what Nicole has shared, of course, the biggest hurdles that we have in these communities, for me, I keep emphasizing that it's issues of awareness and also participation. They continue to be marginalized and being sidelined. But also what is very key to note is that these communities, to a large extent, really know how to protect, perhaps participate in ensuring that the climate is okay, just that the terminologies might be different, these new terminologies that are coming up. But of course, they have got their own traditional ways of doing things that continues to protect their communities. However, the coming in of industrialization, development, and all that, they're the ones that evading their places, telling them now to start practicing different things. So what seems really important is to invest already on the existing solution that these communities have been using before. Of course, industrialization is very important, but then to what extent is it important to these communities? And then also the other thing would be to invest in them, in their ideas, so that there is increased sense of ownership of what is happening. And lastly, participation, which is very key. I think you cannot participate in something that you are not aware of. You cannot participate in something that you might have seen the impact, but if you are not given a platform for participation, it's not easy to participate. So it's very important that there's increased levels of participation and engagement using existing structures, even at these community levels.
Thanks, Harry.
Is it all right if I add something?
Yeah, of course, Rhiannon.
Okay. I think, yeah, I definitely agree with what Nicole and Harry have raised. And I think also, as especially like for myself as an activist based in the UK, I think it's equally important to think about who we're listening to, who really doesn't deserve a platform, right? So like we have a huge number of the major oil companies participating in COP, not just oil companies, but big polluters, big mining companies, when there's obviously a significant conflict of interest, and many of them have ongoing cases of human rights abuses. So I think, and I mean, not me personally, but like the UK and COP is quite happily giving these people a platform and giving these companies a platform. And I think we need to really evaluate, whether the people who have been publishing fake science for the last 30 years about the climate crisis deserve to be at a seat at the table talking about the solution, often at the expense of Indigenous communities or communities from the global south who should be at that seat talking about the reality that is facing them, that is not going to face the bankers and the billionaires and the CEOs of the oil companies. So I think it's really important that, as well as saying who we should listen to, we think about who we're giving attention to, who we really shouldn't be, and who are not part of the solution and who have been trying to derail the solution for decades. And I think there was also like a study came out recently about like who we're listening to in terms of demographics, right? With like climate leaders, quote unquote, of course, like overwhelmingly being represented as like white men from the global north, right? Whereas actually we know that like most of the knowledge and the practices and so much lived experience of not just the climate crisis, but also the injustices that resulted in it, come from communities who are not from that background. So I think it's really important to dismantle our like still very colonial ideas of who has knowledge, whose knowledge is superior, and like Nicole was talking about earlier, which knowledge systems we value. So I think that's kind of what I would add to that, is that we need to actively platform people who deserve that platform, and we need to deplatform some people who are potentially not so deserving of the amount of airtime that they're getting.
Thank you, Rhiannon. And I guess touching on platform and how to be listened and so on, there is a question in the chat right now from Anthony. He asked to Harry and Nicole and explain that all UK-based listeners can actually write to the different MPs to put questions to UK ministers on their behalf. So I guess this is a platform that citizens can use to ask about climate change or question the actions of the government. And Anthony wonders, what is the top question or issue that you would like a UK-based listener to have their MPs put into ministers? And he explains that actually, when it is done in that way, the minister has to respond personally. So what could you ask? And I will add, do you think this is a platform that can be used or something that can be used with your communities more generally?
I think that's great to know that the UK system works like that. I wish our Canadian and American system worked that way, where people actually had to respond. One of the things that, I think I've seen have the most impact, at least from a statement, which I don't think is very well known. And on average, over the course of a lifetime, the emissions of a single typical American, but we can extrapolate that very easily to a European, to a Canadian, are significant enough to contribute to the severe suffering and or deaths of 2 future people. On average, and over the course of the lifetime, the emissions of a single typical American Westerner are significant enough to contribute to the severe suffering and or death of 2 future people. When we can qualify those moral arguments outside of ourselves, it makes it very easy to not engage in action, because there's the big polluters, there's all these others that are contributing, and it's hard for individuals to take responsibility for those. And I find bringing those statistics back to home and how our day-to-day impacts do make a difference on future people can sometimes help bridge those connections. And I often ask people, is it worth 1 person? Is it worth 2 people? Is it worth 3 people later on, that my life choices will engage with suffering later? And where is the cutoff for that? Because it brings in morals, it brings in, individual impact, but it also brings out advocacy and how we talk about intergenerational equity, and also some of these other concepts that are a little bit more philosophical, but I think are tangible for people to understand. So I've often wondered about that, if you have one moment and one question, so to speak, with whoever it is, that may be, and I think about that, where is that line for you personally? And force people to really think about that component, because it's that element, I think, unfortunately, of morbidity and mortality that sort of seeps in when you think about the impacts later on. But I'm going to think about that and see if I can think of, you know, what that question might be. That's got me thinking now.
Thanks, Nicole. Harry.
All right. Big question. Quite amazing question. Well, I think for me, I wouldn't have, just like I said, that there wouldn't be quite a specific question, but what's important for me would be, how are you going to tax, or perhaps going to make sure that the polluters begin paying for the harm that they have done to our environment? I think that could be a biggest question that I would love to ask my leaders who could be attending the COP26. But of course, I know the question was more specific to Rhiannon, so I would love to hear from more. Yeah, sure.
Thanks, Ari. Rhiannon, I think I have a more specific question for you in another vein. So one of our speakers, of our attendees as well, is asking, I assume, given that you all are reinforcing the idea of citizen participations, if given what you've learned as a county climate commissioner, if Cambridgeshire have the right structure of local government to involve citizens, I guess, and to lead the change, and also what should the university, the city council maybe do to get people, residents, students educated on the essentials to take or start taking action straight away?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And I think no local government or any in the UK, or I don't think any country is set up in the perfect way, right? So, and I think there are two big things that contribute to that. I think one of them is that local government needs to be given the space and the funding and the permission to be more dynamic in what it does, because a lot of tackling the climate crisis will be about trying new things or going back to old things that we used to do, and sometimes it won't work, right? And then when you say, okay, well, we tried that, it didn't quite work, and we're going to improve it and do it this a little bit better. And we don't normally kind of socially, morally allow our governments to work like that or to try things like that. So I think like looking at local government as a source of innovation and dynamism is really important. And I think active citizen participation, like one of my favorite methods is citizens assemblies. We did a mini one for our report, and we think they should be used in decision making across all levels of government. So I think that was really key. And in terms of getting people involved immediately, I think funding for community-led initiatives is the best way to do it, because you're not going to get people involved by saying, you have to get involved, do what I say. You know, it's about saying like, there is now funding for a community farm in your local area. Get in touch with this person to like become a volunteer at it, you know, or, you know, we are redesigning the bus route so that it works for everyone, including people with caring responsibilities. Do you have a caring responsibility? Would you like to be part of designing this? So I think there's lots of different ways, but I think it starts with respecting people's opinions, respecting people's knowledge, and giving them a voice in decision making. And in terms of Cambridge University itself, I think from my experience as a student, I don't think we're connected nearly enough or really very much at all to local communities, especially not even in Cambridge City, let alone outside of that area. So I think that would be really important. And then in terms of the structure of council taxes, I don't know enough about the council tax structure, sadly, to comment specifically on that. But yeah, I think those would be my big ones.
Thank you, Rhiannon. I mean, I think what you are mentioning is something that we've seen in the news in the last months as well. At least in my case, the Convention of Citizens in France, for example, is an example of this kind of assemblies of citizens. I would like to know, but this is at the national level, So from the point of view of Nicole and Harry that also mentioned before about how to get involved with local communities on the benefits of renewable energy or more of grid system and all that, what are the lessons that we learn to do these local citizen assemblies that we can extrapolate to other levels or other communities? Sorry.
I think there's absolutely lessons that can be gained. That actually, our region in Northern Canada is one of the few places in the world that actually has a consensus government structure, which is very unique comparatively to many other states, provinces, nations, in how they actually think about solutions, which comes to, I guess, exemplify some of this sort of citizens-based approach where there's no party politics, there's no, coming from a base. It really is collective community and representation from regions having to come through in what we would call a traditional Indigenous governance style. Nunavut, which is an Arctic region in Canada, also has this style of governance as well. And I think there's a lot to be learned on putting those party lines aside, the politics aside, and coming forward to governance as people and human beings and as community, as opposed to a conservative or a liberal or whatever it is. And I would love to see this type of governance more talked about, as noted by some of the benefits of things like citizen assemblies.
Thank you, Nicole. Harry, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think from my perspective, or from a narrative where I'm sitting from, it's important to utilize the already existing structures. I think our governance system allows currently, more particular, that the new government is pushing more for decentralization of power. So it will be important now to integrate aspects of climate issues in these structures. So it's important to push for those governance structures so that they are implemented with the existing policies that the government wants to put across, so that once they are implemented, then we can begin pushing for the integration of climate issues in these particular structures. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Harry. I will pose very quick one question because I think it will be controversial and I want to see your opinions, and then I will wrap up. So there is a question about the role of big polluters. If we, or if you speakers don't think that these big polluters, such oil companies, need to be part of the solution instead of taking away the platform from them, can we integrate them in some way, or is a kind of actor that we shouldn't consider at all?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I'll give a stab at it because I think I raised this issue. So I think people say, we have to involve them because they have all the money and power, but that's kind of what the problem is, right? That they have all the money and power, because if your entire business model is based on extracting as much from the earth as you can and making as much profit as you can from that, not particularly compatible with the future of the planet, right? And it's also the most profitable business model in the world right now. So it's not something that's going to be given up easily, right? So I think if we want these companies to be part of the solution, we have to kind of stop deluding ourselves that they're going to do it willingly. Because if we, and because it's an interesting academic question, but if we look at the record of these companies, Shell is currently repealing an international court ruling that it has to reduce its emissions while saying it's committed to net zero. BP has their renewable energy stuff all over their Instagram, but it's about 3% of their investments, and the rest of it is going to more oil exploration, right? So I think we have to be a bit more realistic about the willingness of polluters to adopt what is an incredibly profitable and an incredibly powerful business model. So, and I think we take net zero pledges and caring about the planet Instagram posts far too seriously, because these companies have a license to do what they do because they are granted it by governments. And I think if we want them to change, we have to legally take that away, because it's not gonna change without legal steps, would be my opinion on it.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Harry, Nicole, something to finish
Well,
and add on this thing?
Yeah, sure. I think I can go on. Well, it's a very important question. I think we can always talk of the statement that you cannot use the same minds that you used to create solution that made those particular problems. It's important to have them because they have the resources, but I think when we are talking of solutions, particularly to governments, they should be more radical when there are solutions that need to be implemented. Of course, when they are involved in the solution formation, they'll look for something that is not conflicting with their interest. So they'll look for things that are not conflicting with their interest. And this has been the challenge, I think, from someone who's coming from Southern Africa. You see that mostly when you talk about environmental solutions, the ones who are suffering, actually, who are told to be practicing something, are those who their living conditions, or perhaps their activities are not contributing so much to the harm of the environment. So it's very important that they are included, but then I think they should be included when the solutions have been provided. Then they're given an option, choose, are you ready to participate in this, or perhaps other actions should be taken upon your institutions. I think that's what I would share.
I don't have anything to add. I think they did a great job.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Well, and thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, our speakers, for such a wonderful night. I mean, I think at least in my case, particularly, I've learned a lot because I see a lot of points of common and share knowledge regarding the need of participation from citizens, no matter in which context, the need of involving communities, understand their needs particularly. So thank you very much for sharing your insights and your solutions tonight. And I will leave the floor now to our wonderful director, Emily Shockbrook, Professor Emily Shockbrook, to close this fantastic climate festival of Cambridge Zero. And before we finish, I want to thank personally as well Emily for putting all this fantastic agenda and her team, because it's been a set of talks and events that open the venue for debate and for learning and for putting the climate as it should be at the front of the agenda. Thanks, Emily, and the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much, Cristina, and thank you so much for chairing this final session. And also a special thank you to Rhiannon, Nicole and Harry for a really wonderful final session. I think from my perspective, and one of the things that came up in this panel just now was the importance of actively platforming voices that perhaps are not as usually shared to such a wide level, and we've really tried to do that throughout the festival. We started off with our very first session on women and climate change with amazing speakers from Ecuador, Philippines and Belgium, and throughout the 43 sessions that we've had over the course of the past few days, we've really tried as much as we can to share local solutions, to share community solutions to climate change. It's especially important in the run-up to COP26, when we really do need to be moving from ambition to action, that we are really looking at how solutions can be implemented on the ground in ways that are fair and just. And that issue of really the central importance of justice throughout the whole climate change debate, I think, is one that's really come out very clearly throughout the course of the festival. So I'm just going to close by saying this is our second climate change festival. It's becoming an annual event in Cambridge. I think it's incredibly important, and it's incredibly important again to pick up another issue that was raised just now in the panel as a way that we in the university can connect with local communities in Cambridge, but also around the world, which is why it's so wonderful to have been joined not just by Rhiannon, but also by Nicole and Harry in this final session. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. And the next big event on the climate change agenda is just a few days away now in Glasgow, COP26, and I'm sure that we're all really holding our breath and hoping for an ambitious outcome from the negotiations. So thank you very much, everyone.